I would say the tricky part is that how do you make sure you understand who's the technical brain in the company? So that sometimes could be the hardest part and could also be problematic for the value creation. So there's no point in buying a company if the key talent does not sign employment agreement.
Welcome to M&A Science, where we curate knowledge from the best in M&A to continuously improve. If you're interested in keeping up the latest from M&A Science, subscribe to our free newsletter at mascience.com. Every week, we share highlights from our interviews, invitations to events, M&A role openings, and other resources as we build the greatest community of forward-thinking M&A practitioners. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. Joining me today is Andy Wijaya, Senior Director, M&A at KLA. KLA is a capital equipment company that supplies process control and yield management systems for the semiconductor industry and other related nanoelectronics industries. Traded on NASDAQ under KLAC. Today, we're talking about how to manage deals from strategy to closing. Andy, welcome back. This is great. I got you to come back. We didn't get to finish our actual interview that we planned. We kind of went on a whole different direction. Can we kick things off with a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so a quick background. Basically, I would say, a unique or different background than typical M&A professional, given my educational and the career background-wise. So educational-wise is straightforward chemical engineering. I did some minor in finance and other more in venture investment and sort of the game theory of business or decision analysis. Career-wise, I'm somewhat also an outlier because I was managed to build my career along multiple stack of the high-tech stack, meaning from the silicon to the device level to the software. And now I'm in the company level, so for the M&A acquiring company. So I got to see from I would say from nanoscale to the board level decision making. So.
Yeah, you're interesting. You're a mesh of an engineer and an M&A person. And in this last interview we did, we talked about the importance of the integration team, joining the diligence team, and the ability to zoom in, zoom out of deals. Let's go into strategy. How do you formulate your strategy?
Strategy seems very loaded terms, right? But I think realistically, I would say the short answer or the more realistic answer is a top-down and bottom-up. I'll explain in a minute what I mean by that. So I would say we're strictly talking about strategy in M&A. Okay? That involve M&A. Obviously, there's many different ways you define a strategy. There's many different reasons why you acquire companies. But all in all, the simple overlap between strategy and M&A is very simple. So either when you already have a strategy, then you have to find an M&A target, one scenario. Or sometimes you have a target, then you have to build a strategy. So see if you can build a strategy around it. Okay? Now, what I mean by top-down or bottom-up, realistically, in the big organizations, you could have a interaction that started from the top or also started from the bottom. Typically, more importantly, you need to kind of understand what is the business objective of any organization, either a business unit or divisions. So you could partner with the leaders, business leader or the executive, kind of top down, or you could partner with the technical leader or marketing leader. It's kind of on the bottom up. Typically on the top down side, you're kind of trying to understand the business objective or direction of a leader in their respective divisions. Right? This could be as simple as, hey, how do we get into these new markets, right? How do we explore that? Okay. Bottom up tend to be, hey, we have a roadmap. Here's the roadmap. I think we have a gap. How do we fill in that gap? So, and you kind of up level it to the executives. Right? So I would say that's kind of the two-way street of how you formulate a strategy, how you partner with your business leaders. Right?
So I like that because it's in a literal sense, top down, and they're working with the big picture, where you're trying to go, versus bottoms up. It's what are the things right in front of you that you could use to address M&A. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would say it always goes both ways. Right? You could end up with the same strategy, but you could start it from the top or you can start it from the bottom. So depending how things originated. So.
Well, what about when you mentioned sometimes you'll come to find the target and then develop the strategy, which I thought's a no-no. I thought that's when you have deal fever and you're making your rationale to do the deal as opposed to executing against a well-defined strategy.
I know sometimes we live in the world that we want to have a real, have a strategy, have a process. Everyone has to fit in into my way of original objectives. So. But I think in reality, I don't think we can be that naive that we know every single target out there. So sometimes you come along, there are a company that they want to sell and someone reach out to you. So, and even though maybe in your radar, but you're not that familiar. So, hey, this is kind of interesting, something that we know it exists, but we never really quite explore it. So you're gonna have to build a strategy if there is a way to build a strategy around it. Sometimes this come handy in terms of opportunistic or defensive. Right? What happens if there's a company that approach you, say that, hey, your competitor is about to acquire us. Are you interested with us? So you get your mind thinking, right? Even though originally it's not in your quote unquote um, pipelines, right? Then you actually have to think, hey, this company on sale, are we missing something? Can we build strategy around that? Is there any compelling enough reason to even entertain it? So there are quite a few of that. So obviously the world is big and you could never know just about everything that you want. So.
But how like off base does that go? Is it, hey, we never thought about this really near adjacency, or is it here we got all this news on regenerative AI and now this thing popped up? Why don't we start looking at it and thinking more and figure out how we can do something with it?
In terms of adjacencies, right, you could only, I mean, let's say you have, just making a round number, you have 100 company in your pipelines, right? I don't think you will have 100 deal thesis ready for any of those companies, right? Because obviously each of the deal thesis you have involve multiple people, multiple executives, right? There's always sort of a adjacency uh, far away enough that you don't have deal thesis ready, so. But every now and then they pop up, say, hey, they're on sale, about to get acquired. So then you have to build a deal thesis, see if any compelling reason enough or deal thesis that you want to entertain. So that's where the time crunch is. Right? You kind of, it's not ideal, but it does often come along that way.
All right, that's an interesting way to look at it. How do you go about managing your pipeline as you start shaping these opportunities?
The short answer is it varies. Right? Maybe I'm coming from a somewhat medium large corporation background. So I think I spoke with some other my colleague in the kind of early startup growth companies, right? It's different than large corporation kind of stuff. So when I say it's varies, right, depending on if it is in a smaller organizations, right? It vary widely from smaller organization to what I call serial acquirer. So people who acquire, 5, 10 company a year. So, I mean, tool wise, sometimes on the small organization is just the, I would say, prioritization or shuffling priority in the mind of a few people. So, okay, that's the simplest way. Okay, Then some people have an Excel or extensive Excel list. Some people use Power BI, and sometimes I think it's fancy as cloud-based dashboard or tie into the project management. Right? But that's just the tools. Right? I think the tricky one that's hard to capture in terms of managing your pipeline, I would say, as simple as how do you update your knowledge about private companies? Right? That's hard. Right? Data is not available out there. So, and how do you update the rationals? Right? We just mentioned if you even have 100 deal in the pipeline, not all of them will have some sort of rational or thesis why you want to acquire. So, and it's also the ever-changing opinions, right, of the decision makers. Those are some of the components that is kind of hard to capture, but you have to deal with it, right, when you're managing a pipeline. So,
That's what keeps you busy.
yeah, it's tricky, so right.
When you start getting these opportunities, well, actually, on that private company data part, is there anything that you found that actually works well?
We try in the past from obviously PitchBook, uh, FactSet, but all in all, it's tend to be incomplete or older data. So the best way to accomplish that is actually by engaging with the targets. You regularly keep in touch with company that I would say, in the higher priority of your pipelines.
Get out there and get the information firsthand.
Yeah.
And as you start approaching targets, how do you start gauging? This ties like to integration. Like, where does that thinking come in terms of starting to gauge like the level or amount of integration that's going to be involved?
This is always the conundrum, sir. When is the integration start? When is the thinking starts? Right? I would say, first of all, I don't think it's possible to know the full integration plan prior to engagement. Right? As we just mentioned, right? To get the private company information is hard, especially on the private information. Even on the public information, public companies, right? It's also hard, the details. Right? So I don't think it's possible to get a full integration plans, right? But having said that, right, it's always very useful to kind of have, I would say, high level thought in terms of how you're going to integrate down the line that support your deal thesis, right? Because in essence, this give you some sort of a objective during the engagement, right? While you're trying to learn from the targets, right? So you have some assumption, high level. Hey, I think I'm going to integrate the product and co-locate or have everyone in the same place to collaborate, things like that. Right? Then as you go in target engagement, that's where the learnings are. From that learning, you can say, hey, we have to modify this, or we're confirming either you confirm, modify, or invalidate. Right? Sometimes it's easy as we thought we're going to have everyone in the same place. Then we just learned that a bigger portion of their R&D is somewhere else, right? In different countries. Right? So this kind of can throw you off. Right? So you have to modify your thesis. Yeah. So I think to some degree there is that. To some degree, there's always some level of integration. It really hard to avoid some level of integration when you acquire a company, unless you just make an investment, right? It becomes standalone. As simple as how do they work together, sir? If you plan to integrate their products, right? They probably need to have some sort of SharePoint. So therefore, there's some IT integration in it. Even though sometimes we don't call it integrated company, but there is some level of integration, sir, to support the deal thesis, in my experience.
You start off with a really high level assumption and try to refine it as much as you can as you go.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not possible to get all the detail, but it's always good to have some preliminary high level thoughts, right, as you're going into the engagement.
Who are the people you get involved on these deals?
going back to sort of on the strategy side, so bear in mind, right? Any strategy that involving an M&A, right? There is confidentiality element to it. Right? Okay. So typically, you involve um, the relevant people. Right? This could be the technical leader on the product side and the business side as well. So, as you go along in the process, more and more people get involved. Right? Obviously, when you go to due diligence and stuff. Right? And obviously, once it's signed and closed, it'll become the broader audience. Right? This is how you communicate strategy, how you communicate M&As. Right? In reality, it's not like, hey, I'll tell everyone. It's more like, I would say, you kind of uh, communicate sufficient information to the relevant people to kind of focus on their executions. Right? The keyword here, sufficient, relevant, and focus. It's not like we broadcast everything, right? Obviously, for many reasons. One of them could be a legal reason as well. So.
Okay. So you really keep it tight seal around who is involved with it. You have the tech lead, you have business unit, who else? Legal.
Yeah, marketing, and then as you go through, obviously legal, finance, and as you go to LOIs, once LOI, they go to diligence, you will expand to, other functional group, and even more people on the technical side as well. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. How do you work with those business unit leaders with that stage before you get to LOI or getting to LOI, I should say?
I would say before communicate before giving an LOI or quote unquote communicating an intent to acquire. So first, the acquirer would be multiple stakeholders, right? I would say they themselves need to convince themselves, right? It's actually something they want to acquire. Right? Okay. Sometimes I I draw the similarity with a family is buying a house. Right? They themselves will need to convince each other that this is the house that I want.
I like that.
Yeah. But in terms of negotiation, it's the opposite of a buying house. I just want to be clear on that. But in terms of pre-LOIs, right, they have to convince themselves. Now, as a deal leads, right, what is exactly you need to do? So, right? I know this is sound maybe too general, so, right? But in a way, as a deal lead, you have to facilitate the discussion among the stakeholder. Because it's multiple people, right? So they can kind of discuss it, think through it, convert to some decision or approval. So typically, or I would say most, if not all, companies have some approval process before LOIs. Right? It could be as simple as they finally at the end of the meeting agree that yes, I think this is the right thing to do. The same thing with the family buying house. Right? I need more rooms because I'm in COVID. So I need to put the baby in it for the office. Same thing with the companies. I need more capacity. I think it makes sense if we acquire this company, for example. So then, of course, in the discussion, there's some level of commitments, right? Like, hey, if we acquire this company, if the purpose is to expand manufacturing, we have to commit in terms of putting additional capex, right, to scale it. What's the point of buying a company to scale if you don't produce capex? Right? The same thing with you, this family buying a house. You have to furnish a certain room to become an office or something like that. So in a way, you facilitate the discussion for them to converge and kind of start discussing some level of commitment, what to do with the company if we can confirm the deal thesis to the engagements. Because post LOI, that's where we learn as much as possible whether some of this commitment makes sense or not.
Then how do you continue managing the process as you bring all these stakeholders in, you get into diligence?
You have many different way of managing this. Okay, it's not one solution fits all. Okay, you let's say you have a cadence of one-on-one meeting with certain stakeholder. You have what I call a smaller group discussion for specific topics. sometimes certain topics involve multiple stakeholder or functional group. Then you have a team meeting, so that kind of run the entire show. So you run the entire show, and obviously, last but not least, you also keep in touch with the execs, right? Update them, either something you learn new, milestone, or approvals. Right? So this kind of I would say, process, ensuring that, like I mentioned earlier, you can always go zoom in and zoom out to the high levels. Therefore, there is no disconnect. Right? Some problem you need to go to smaller group discussion. Some problem even you have to go to one-on-ones, right? That you have to facilitate and kind of bring it to an end, some of the problems or challenges they encounter.
Is this all mapped out and designed in terms of how you have meetings, who's involved, frequency, and everything?
Generally, the recurring meeting is there. So, okay. Now, the I would say the smaller group discussion is at ad hoc, right? Depending on what we learn during diligence or during engagements. Right? Yeah. And of course, the one-on-one also is flexible. So,
How do you keep people in line so that you know they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
we do have project management, a way of maintaining that. So we have, like I said, we have typically the cadence of meeting, either twice a week, once a week, those kind of stuff, depending on how intense the due diligence is. There is a reporting from each function, so that it can broadcast to different people. And then the key here is basically anything that come out, the bigger audience aware of, then we can narrow it down who's get impacted. Then you go to smaller group discussion, making sure that everyone understands the impact. Then you have the one-on-one to drive them to conclusions. I would say that's the most, yeah. Yeah. So as I was saying, so in the previous our conversation, you have to be realistic that a lot of your team member are not a full-time M&As. Any organization, sometimes I categorize a full-timer, a part-timer, and also external resources. Not only you have to manage the part-timer, you also have to manage sort of external consults. Right?
That's a lot of stakeholder.
That's what M&A is. Keep in mind, you're buying a company, right? It's not like you're buying a company with. Sometimes I keep remind people, we're buying a company that may have 10, 20 years histories, right? With all the baggages that we have to learn. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. How about the integration stuff? How that gets stepped up? Like, ideally, you get into the thick of diligence, but then you probably should start thinking about the integration stuff.
Ideally, some member, if not all member of the due diligence become the integration teams. Okay. But in reality, you may actually end up with some of them and actually expanding to more people for the integration. So I always kind of remind people in diligence teams, right? The early stage here is like two work stream in parallel. The first, when we start the diligence, is discovery, trying to learn. Okay. Then you try to figure out if any of these risks can be mitigated. Okay. Then eventually you start transitioning to integration. How do we mitigate all these risks in terms of planning for the integration? Then they start full blown on the integration planning side of it as you're getting toward the end of the diligence, right? So there is, discovery, mitigation, and then start planning, mitigations. Right? So therefore, if it is the same group of people or majority of the people will be part of the integration and diligence, that's the best way. So kind of seamless, I would say, not seamless transaction without involving different people. But in reality, it's not like that. So you actually have some people that kind of fade away before they pass it on to the integration, their colleagues in that particular functional groups.
Any tips and tricks on how do you sort of manage this in a way that gives you the best outcomes? What you described makes a lot of sense, right? That you have overlap. Ideally, the same folks doing diligence continue on to do the integration.
Yep.
That doesn't always happen. A lot of times it's two completely different teams and there's a disconnect. But it sounds like the ideal thing is keep the continuity there.
So one way to mitigate some of disconnects, right? So I know the disconnect will happen. No, I mean, the people who's in the diligence at some point, if different than the people who integrated, two different people looking at the same event can have two different opinion. And then this is not even two people at the same event. Some guy looking at the other one has to execute. So the disconnect could happen. So this is where I think important is that an integration lead has to involve in the due diligence and sometimes earlier. So when the lead has quote unquote a set of fact and truths, even though there is a disconnect in certain places, you can always go back to the person to realign it. Okay. Integration lead could be diligence lead or could be just the integration lead. But if they are not in diligence lead, you make sure that the integration lead actually participate in diligence. Okay. So that's one way to sort of making sure that the set of fact and truth does not get diluted or doesn't pass down from the diligence to integrations.
What are other things that go wrong? Like, what have you seen that really tends to be the fail points or where value gets leaked in the deal?
Sometimes people get oversight. Okay. What I mean by people is key talents. Because keep in mind, on the other side, um, also have some confidentialities. Right? They cannot get involved um, a lot of people in the discussion as well. They also have to maintain some kind of secrecies. Right? Some of their talent may not be in the discussion with us. I would say the tricky part is that how do you make sure you understand who's the technical brain in the company? So that sometimes could be the hardest part and could also be um, problematic for the value creation. So
Right.
there's no point in buying a company if the key talent does not sign employment agreement, things like that. So
Right. Right.
or they are not happy. There's some conflict in the past or something like that. So sometimes that could be tricky to uncover, sir, in due diligence. Sir.
Yeah. Is there anything that you could do to help make sure you identify all those key people?
We obviously in due diligence we interview people. So we, we I think one thing I sometimes advise people is ask the same question to multiple different people and see if the answer is different about the company, about the flow of things. And then you'll discover some version of the truth that you think is true. So of course, you will never find the truth of the truth until you acquire and then you deal with them on a daily basis. Right?
I like it. The truth of the truth.
uh, so long it's not alternative truths. Right?
Yeah. That's also true.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And then you talk to people, talk through who does what, get to know.
Yeah, and ask them the same questions. Right? See if their answer is different. Right?
Yeah.
You know, how does the flow works? Right? And then they'll tell you, oh, from A to B to C to C D. And then you tell the different guy, oh, B, C, D, E, and A. Then you like trying to figure out what is the real key people. So who's the gatekeeper, this kind of stuff.
How like bound do you make key people? I mean, is it, hey, we want employment agreement signed before we close, and that's like a whatever 3 year, 5 year commitment, and
Yeah, so that's kind of a borderlining of the discussion about signing condition or conditions as you managing the deal towards sign or toward closing. Right? it, I would say it varies. Okay. So obviously, depending on the size of the deal and the complexity of the deals. So in a small deal, you may be able to get away, so right, to have the key talent sign before the key talent to sign agreement before if we sign the deal. So, realistically, when you get to even medium or a larger deal, they cannot broadcast this deal happening to everyone of the key talents. So it may happen during between sign and closing. So,
Hmm.
so regarding what are the term, it varies widely depending on country to country. Some country non-compete doesn't mean anything. So, okay, because not enforceable by law. So depending on and also non-compete could also have financial implications. Right? I think in some country you actually have to compensate them, so, for them not to work for other companies. So you kind of have to balance that too in terms of what can be done, and then you can have, given what you're facing on the maybe some limited in terms of how you can retain, then you have to start thinking redundancies, right? Some knowledge transfer in the early periods. Right? Again, we cannot hold people to work for company uh, for, for for a certain period of time. If they don't want to, they can realistically they can quit, right? Unless there's retention or some deferred consideration kind of stuff. But in reality, they can always quit, right? Yeah.
Right.
Therefore, is some sort of knowledge transfer or redundancy need to happen, right? If there is a bottleneck or a gatekeepers.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, that so much of this is around the people, and yeah, you got a lot of different conditions that you have to manage. Anything around trying to create a good people experience throughout this whole transaction? Because I feel like that's probably, as the industry as a whole has become more conscious about M&A not being just purely a financial exercise, but a lot of this is about aligning people so that they're aligned on priorities and can work together to achieve those goals. Is there anything around that thinking, or things you've learned around more on the stakeholder alignment and just those type of people skills that really make the deal successful?
Yeah, so I would say um, one thing that one need to have dealing with the M&A is you need to have an open-minded. Keep in mind you're dealing with people that could have completely different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
different process of how they do things. We can come in and here's my process, I want you to follow, right? But in reality they have different process. They are different people. They sometimes they come from a different country, which is completely different perspectives, right?
Sure.
So the thing you have to be mindful is that, hey, we acquire, for example, if we enter to the new markets, right? we we are trying to acquire them because they are successful in this market. Okay, there is something that they do right to get to the market instead of us. Okay,